Greetings and welcome to this all new episode of Let's Create Something with TrapcodeTAO, and today we're gonna create this type of tentacular mess, and we're gonna look at an easy way to make it loop using the simple offset, not using the build-up mode this time. And we're gonna apply a texture on that, and what's most interesting in this tutorial is we're gonna see how to, only with using TrapcodeTAO, we're gonna see how to make some kind of an endless floor that has dynamic shadows, not area shadows, but ambient occlusion shadows that makes it look a little bit nicer than if it's just flying in the air or something like that. And well, let's hop in After Effects and let's follow me along as we're gonna go through this. I'm gonna try to remember how I did it yesterday, so I'm gonna probably be much different, but we're gonna look at the principle and try to understand and get our heads around that. So let's create a new composition. I've made it 1080 by 1080, a square composition. Let's hit Control Y to create a new solid, and let's make it to the comp size. I'm gonna call this one Tau, and let's save this already. I have two examples. This one's gonna be the third. So let's apply Tau on our solid, and we're not gonna use the automatically generated path in this example. So let's create a light, Control Shift Alt L, and this one is going to be a spotlight. Let's call it Tau all caps, and we're gonna make it pure white, so FFFFFF. And you can set the cone angle to 0 if it's gonna be a little bit less annoying in the viewport. And then we're gonna right away right click there and set the auto orient to off. Then what we're gonna do is we're gonna create ourselves a little architecture here with nulls, so just to easy things up a little bit. So this one is going to be our scaling null. Doing that will allow us to unproportionally rescale some elements like our segments individually, and so then we can keep the we can keep here in the size everything at 100, but we'll be able to scale them unproportionally using this null if we uncheck the link here in the scale property. So let's link it up to that, and we want to make sure that it sits at the center. So by default it's going to be at some position. We're going to set that to 0, 0, and 0 after we've linked it to the null, so then it's right at the center. And we're going to duplicate this null, so Control D, and this one we're going to call it rotating null. So if we want to do anything rotation, this can be another step that will help us with our hierarchy. And yeah, we're gonna create another one, and this one we're gonna call it settings, and it's gonna kind of be our main one. And perhaps we're gonna duplicate a few a couple of these three and keep it all general settings in here in this layer. So yeah, we can link this one up to there, and all of them are 3D, so we're ready to start. Now, first thing we can do is simply make it go straight up. So let's go to frame 300, and let's do it a different way. So on this scaling null, we're gonna put a setting. We're gonna put a custom setting and expression control, and this will be the position Y, and this will be the position X. So what we're going to do here is we're going to move it on the X and on the Y, all right? But we're gonna use the time value for that. So let's remove all our keyframes here, and let's alt click so we can write down something, and we're gonna open up the bracket. First of all, let's simply make our little array here. So we're just gonna for the first value, we're gonna pick whip the first here. For the second, we're gonna grab the second, and for the third, we're gonna grab the third value. And remember to put a comma in between each. So we just have to close a bracket to close that. And instead of transform position 0, we're gonna type down time multiply by 1. So how will that work? All right. So this is going to make it move on X on over time. So, and then we're gonna put that in between parentheses, and we're gonna multiply that by something that we're gonna put down in this custom slider. So let's hit star on the numpad for multiplication. To multiply our times multiply by 1, we're gonna multiply the result of that here in by setting a value here. So once we do that here, we can kind of have a custom slider here to mess around with the length of our thing without having any keyframe whatsoever. So that's one way to do that. And we're gonna do the same thing on the Y. So let's go ahead and let's grab this transform dot position 1. Let's select all that and use the pick whip to grab the position Y this time. And since it's set at 0, nothing should happen. But oh, is that what we needed to do? No, not at all. Not at all. We need to come and grab that and open parentheses, type down times multiply by 1, and then multiply that by our position Y. So that's not the same thing as just selecting it. Now we're gonna have it, we're gonna be able to angle it like that. So that's pretty interesting. We have only 2 sliders here to control our length and the angle of our thing there, depending on, because we're gonna have different pieces like that. And I don't think it's quite necessary to have this step like multiply by 1. It's just, we can just multiply it by we can take that here up on right up to the comma and cut that and replace the 1 by that, and then delete the multiplication. So I made it a little bit overkill there, over complex. It doesn't need this step. If we're going to multiply it by 1, it's completely useless to have that. So let's multiply it by that, and let's make sure that we don't have that. So that allows us to control that, and we're not putting that on our general settings because we want to keep that on our scaling or on the rotating. Any is good. So that's our first tentacle. For the moment, it's got 3 sides. Let's add more. So we're gonna make it kind of cylindrical, and let's get in the rendering, and we can set that to smooth. And we can also in the segments uncheck the break sides and uncheck the chamfer. So that's a basic cylinder going up, and we have our custom settings for the angle there. So that's pretty cool. What are we gonna do with that? We're gonna make it narrower at the tip. So to do that, we're gonna scale our radius on the light. So we have to activate this from inside the paths from TAO lights. We have to activate the size from radius here. And once we do that, let's quickly twice tap on A to open up the properties. And the radius now is going to allow us to control the width, the thickness of our cylinder. So what we're gonna do is simply add a keyframe here, and by default, when we don't have any keyframes, it uses 10 seconds for the construction of geometry. So we're gonna go to frame 300, which is 10 seconds at 30 frames per second, and we're gonna add an other, and we're gonna set that to 0. So depending on your version of After Effects, if we stay there, perhaps it's not gonna change anything in the viewport, so we can force it to refresh by hitting Control-Alt-/, and that's gonna purge the memory. So this is a cool way to make a nice cone with a triangle with a circular base. But we're gonna add some wiggle to that because we don't want it to be straight like that. So let's do that, and we're gonna be able to add a general wiggle on there. So we're gonna need 3 settings here that we're gonna make our lives easier. So let's go and add a slider control, and first we're gonna call this one frec for the frequency. Let's duplicate Control-D, this one, let's call it amp, and we're gonna make a third one, and we're gonna call this one seed. And let's hook those up to something. So let's go right in our scaling null, and scaling, and because if we're moving something, then we want to move that which is going to be what will allow us to scale it unproportionally later on. So let's move this, and let's add a wiggle to the position. So the position already has some code there, so we can add there. It's gonna be a little messy and complicated, but let's see if we can do it like this. So right after the right here, let's just before the comma, let's add a plus symbol, and let's type down the wiggle. Let's start by 1, 1, close the parentheses, and now we have to open the bracket and put 0 like this. All right, so 1, 1. All right, let's go back to our settings here. I'm gonna lock this down so we can keep it here in our vision. So let's connect the first value here to the frec, and let's select the number 1 here, the second value, and let's connect that to the amp. And on top of all that, let's go at the beginning here and hit enter to skip one line, and so we can type down at the beginning seed random and open parentheses, and we're gonna pick whip that to the seed here and close that. Close the parentheses, and it doesn't work. What kind of an error did I do? So let's see. Random seed random, this, and it's gotta have this semicolon at the end there. So we end this instruction, and then we have another one. So right now nothing's happening, all our values are still at 0, but let's increase things there. So let's start by setting this back to 1. So that's what this will do. It'll allow us to wiggle our light, our path here. So if we look at if we click on this here, show post expression graph, then we'll kind of have a view on what it is doing. So right now it's only wiggling on the X. So something that we can do is have the exact same wiggle on the Y and also on the Z. So right there, right after the right before the last comma, it's kind of getting hard to see here. There's a lot of code, but I hope you can understand what we're doing here. We're just gonna add the wiggle once again on the Y value. So let's add wiggle, open parentheses, and let's simply pick with the frec here and type down comma and the amp there and close parentheses, and then we have to open the bracket, and this one is going to be number 1 because it's the Y. So now if we look at it, it's going to twirl on the Y as well as on the X, and we can have it do that on the Z as well. So now we have simply this for the Z. Let's keep the 2 in between the brackets, and let's write down wiggle, and let's pick up the frec, comma, let's pick up the amp, and we're done. Are we? We need to add one more parenthesis closure there. So that's it. We've got some wiggling stuff, but it's wiggling very much. It's a good thing that we have our general frec now that we can set to 0.3 so that it's something more like it. Let's create a camera. So Control Alt Shift C. We're gonna set that to 50 millimeter, the default. And let's create a null. Control Alt Shift Y. Make it 3D, and we're gonna use that as a simple camera rig here, so we can rotate around. So let's look at it. So that's pretty fine. If you want to get an idea of how the geometry is, now we can unlock this. We don't need it anymore. Here. Oh yeah, let's get back to our settings. If we change the seed, then it's gonna change we're gonna get different results here. And the amplitude, well, it's gonna make it move further. So it seems that we have some issues here where sometimes it's kind of twists all around, and maybe then we need to go fix that by going in the segments and set that to Y instead of Z, but now it's other parts that have the problem. So it seems that there is one of those axes that we shouldn't be wiggling. So I think it might be the Z. So let's try one by one. So let's pick up the value for the Z here, and let's set it back to that. And what did I do here? So let's undo. And oh yeah, from the wiggle here. So I'm gonna go grab all that and select this. And what? There is this thing now that gotta remove. There. So the Z seems okay that it moves. I think it's let's undo again, and let's have the Y not wiggle. So the Y here, let's remove the plus wiggle that we've added here, and now it looks okay. It looks better. It doesn't tear up the geometry there. So let me undo there, and I'm gonna go here, and under the second pass we can look at the wireframe. So let's increase the amplitude. So here it's all getting twisted and it's not creating good geometry. So let's get in the on the Y value and remove the wiggling on the Y. So that makes it like that. All right. So if we want to change the angle of this, now that's pretty cool because we've got both these sliders here. This is going to make it go higher, and this is going to make it go. It's going to affect its position laterally. So another thing is that maybe you want the wiggle to start. Like you want the bottom of our structure to be not affected by the wiggle. So right now, as our wiggle starts, it's already like in motion, and it's going in slaloms like that. But what if we want the very beginning of it to be straight? Well, simply keyframe the amplitude here. So there's something easy for us that we can do here. Add a keyframe on the amplitude and move it a little bit forward, and set another one after that a little further. And the first one, let's set that to 0. So that'll make like some sort of stump, which is going to keep straight. So it's gonna act as the base of our thing, and then we can adjust those keyframes here depending on how we want it to be angled. So that's pretty fine. Let's move back a little bit with our camera so we can see the tip of our thing there. And let's create more. So we're gonna use the repeater, and using the repeater, well, we're gonna repeat a wiggle. So it's gonna be the same wiggle each time. So one way that we can add more randomness in there is having more than one here. So let's and oh yeah, and I think it would be a good idea here on the settings is that we can hit I'm not gonna hit F9 because I know what it does. It stops the recording, but let's ease in or ease out, and we can adjust our graph here to make sure that it's as gradual as it can get for this first start of the curve there. So pretty cool. Now let's make a second one. So let's start by making it black and white, or if we want to have a specific color here, let's make it red orange. Let's go with some red orange, some dark red orange. So really it's a pretty useful to have the wireframe pass here just activated, just so we can get an idea of how our geometry looks, and then we can remove it afterwards, just like that. So this is how it looks without the... Let's duplicate our little orange group here, and let's leave the settings out of there. So let's duplicate all that, and let's bring them all on the top here, and we can select a different color code for them. So that's a group here. And now so this thing here. Now, first thing that we are going to do here is it's got the same random seed as the first one, so it's gonna be identical. So we want to change that, so we can simply add 1 to that. And is it going to do it? Yeah. So I've just refreshed there, and then we've got a different result here. So that's a different one. And we can also, since we've set those here to help us with the length and everything, we can still play around with those, and it won't affect the first one. So let's try to make something like that. And they have the same general frequency and amplitude. That's something that you could also put separate if you feel you would need different wiggles in there, but let's keep it the same. It's gonna make it easier for us. So now that we've got that, we can make it 4, and let's say 4 but not more than that. Okay, so we're gonna duplicate the whole bunch here, and then we're gonna bring that up, and since we made our little color pattern here, it's kind of easier for us to say that this is the first, this is the second group, the third group, and it's alternating, and we've got our general settings here, still master of all those. So let's grab this here, and let's simply like add one more here to the seed random to make it once again different from the first and the second one. So let's do that. And one thing that we could do is, instead of writing down a number here, it can be the index number. So writing down the index number here will also randomize everything, but we want the reason I'm keeping it down to straight numbers there is simply where is it there, the index. See, that's our fourth one. We're gonna make it different color so we can easily see it easily. So there is our last one. So this one has been set to index. So if we add a new layer, for example, I'm done, I want to color grade this, I'm going to add an adjustment layer. So Control Alt Y, and let's refresh. So nothing changes in the wiggle except for the blue one. So each time I'm going to be adding a layer. Like, is it going to change? Yeah, if I refresh it, it changes the wiggle, but the other one stays the same. And sometimes you want to be able to, like, you have a nice result, you want to keep it, you don't want it to change. So that's why I'm typing down C, but I have to refresh it to make it actually change. So yeah, so we're not gonna write down index here, type down index, we're gonna type down a number. So let's try our randomizer here. So the seed, and once again we need to refresh that. So the seed should allow us to scramble the result here and get different kind of wiggles. And of course the amplitude, if we want to change it, we can change it here on the second keyframe and then refresh to get different results. So I'm gonna set this back to 0. I think it looks kind of neat, this one. So yeah, let's make it the same color as the other one, or let's make them all white because we're gonna color them with a texture. Now that we have them all white, we can make them smoother by increasing the amount of segments. So in the end, you'll decide how exactly you want it, but let's remove the wireframes now for the moment. Alright, so let's set our camera angle back to 0. That's why we didn't have a nice reflection and lightings. Let's make ourselves a seamless floor. So we have this stump here at the bottom. We want to make it nicer, like we want to have something that cuts it down the bottom of it. So let's make ourselves a floor, and I'll show you how to do that. We're gonna create a new light, so Control Alt Shift L, and we're gonna call it Tau, and it's gonna be a spotlight. We're gonna make it white, and let's hit OK. So at first we have that, and we basically just want to make it a floor. So let's right click here, and we can set the auto orient to off, and let's change its orientation. So now it's facing this way. We can set that to 90, and then it's like facing it's kind of flat and facing this direction. We can set it at the center, so the center of this comp is 540, 540, and 0. Right now it sits right in the middle of there, so let's make it wider by increasing the radius. And let's increase the radius, and we can't see it because we're looking right at it. It's right at the middle, so we're gonna make ourselves a little angle here, and there we have our floor. So let's make ourselves a little minus 40-degree angle, and then we can pick up the camera and move it down like such, and then we have our little stump here, and it's cut down by the floor. So right here we have that. Doesn't even have any keyframes. It's just like a flat piece of geometry, that is rotated in the right angle, and that makes it our floor. It has the property of catching the ambient occlusion shadows. So we can make a null simply to just, we can color code that, make it brown, and then we can call it floor. So then we'll know where it is if we need it later on. So that's our thing. It's getting great. Let's make a texture for that, or let's first repeat it. So we're gonna basically make it a little bit more complex. Now that we have 4 strands, we can open up the repeat path, and let's open up the first repeater, and we're gonna set that to 0 by default, and we're simply gonna rotate on Y. So let's make 1 copy, and let's rotate it on Y like that. So that makes it a little bit more complex, and we can like rotate it on the side a little bit as well, like such. And then we can make it yet more complex by opening up the second repeater, and let's uncheck that, and let's make 1, and the other one, let's set that to 0, and let's rotate it differently, and let's give it any angle that would seem interesting to the eye there. So let's go with that. And now that's pretty cool, because all our size settings are still like globalized here. We can increase it all at once here, making it easier for us. And let's look at that. So if we want our whole thing to be more cut down by the floor, we can either move this, but I'd rather keep it at the center. We can simply make the floor 3D, and we can simply move that up, not on the Z but on the Y. So doing that, like if you can see here, we're gonna go get the ground point here that would seem interesting for us. So let's get back to -40 or minus 30, and we can see the end of our floor here. So let's try to pick an angle where we don't, and that's fine. All right, let's make ourselves some cool texture that we can animate and give a little bit more motion to that. So I'm gonna hit Control Y to create a new solid, and I'm gonna call this text. And this one doesn't need to be any bigger than 500 by 500. So let's make it this dimension, and let's hit OK. It's gonna make a little square here. We're gonna hit Control Shift C on that, and we're gonna leave all the attributes in there. So we can delete that. It's gonna be our text comp, and it doesn't need to be active in here. We can double click to get inside, and what we're simply gonna do here is add a ramp. So this is what we get by default, and then we're gonna add a colorama on top of that. And the colorama, let's get in the output cycle, and we're gonna use a preset, which is going to be the ramp gray. So we're getting back to that. It's pretty simple, and we're gonna uncheck the interpolate palette. So this is basically what we got. It's a two-tone texture, and let's get back here. So now that we have done that, we can go here right under the texture section, and in the color texture, let's add our text here. So by default, it applies it to our floor as well. If we don't want it on our floor, we have to use an hard-coded line right in the name of the light. So we're gonna type down text colon 0. So let's refresh, and now that tells it to be active only on the texture is going to be active only on the lights where we don't have this hard-coded, and there it's gonna prevent it from being applied. So now we have our texture nicely applied on there, and we can scale this. So let's find the angle first that it is in. So let's add 2 here, and as many as we add there, it'll create more lines. So we only have 2 in our texture, but what TAO allows us to do is to repeat that, and since it's seamless, it should work any number that we put down here. And we can even have it in motion. So let's quickly animate that. And the easy way to do that here with the colorama, that's why I like to use this effect. At frame 0, we're gonna add a keyframe by clicking on the stopwatch on the phase shift, and let's get to frame 90, and we're simply gonna make it revolve 1 full revolution. So this is going to be what it's making up to the frame 90. So let's get back here, and let's get to frame 89, and that's what we're gonna get as a result of that, because it's looping. Pretty fine. And if we want the motion of that to be quicker, now we have to keep in mind that it has to be a multiple of 90 if we want it to loop correctly. So what can be a multiple of 90? Let's say 30. It is going to make it 3 times. So let's bring this keyframe here, and either we go there and we make it revolve 3 times, which is one thing that we can do. Or what I like to do better is get it right here, and alt click on the stopwatch here, and get in the property and make this loop out type cycle. So it'll go a little bit faster. That means that it'll be reflected on how it's moving along here as well. Pretty interesting. Now let's color that, because black and white is maybe not that incredible for colors. So let's choose some kind of red, like this red. Let's not in the RAM. See what I did there? If we change the colors here, it's gonna mess up our we want to change it in the colorama. So right here I'm gonna replace the white, and this, I really hate this color picker because we don't have the right color codes. So this, I'm gonna set this orange there, and let's see. I want to get the color code for this. Real easy. It should be easy. So I'm gonna go back here, and let's say we want to make the floor this exact color. So right here, it's pretty convenient that we have it here. So let's, in our little preview here, it's gonna be the right color, so we can simply pick it from there. So that's a great way to do it. And then, since we got it here and it's not in the shitty color picker, sorry for the language there, but I really hate this color picker. And this here, we can copy the code there, and we're gonna go to the internet, and we're gonna write down opposite color, and we have this opposite color tool here, which is pretty straightforward, and we're gonna paste the color code for our orange here, and it's gonna give us the exact opposite color of that. So I don't know nothing about color theory, but this helps a great deal for that. So let's go in our so let's once again show, we need to see those RGB values for that. We don't have them. So let's pick up this, and we're gonna hit like the Windows key and the left arrow to put this on the left, and I'm gonna close this down. And the internet here, I'm gonna hit the Windows key and on the right to put it on that side, and then I'm gonna pick whip the blue there, and then I've got this RGB code. So it's 7, 207, and 248. So I'm gonna copy the last one, so I just have to remember 7, 207. And then I go to the texture, then I go to the white, and I can place the last one, and then it's 7 and 207. Hey, 207. 7, not those, these are the HSL, these are the red, green, and blue value. This is what we want. So let's click OK. Can get this back to the full view, and now we're kind of ready to have our color pattern here. And I think I liked the floor better when it was orange, but that's completely arbitrary. You decide what you put in there. So let's start off with that, and let's make it a little bit more complex here. So let's not have the phase shift. Let's keep those straight, not moving, and we're gonna make we're gonna use one more thing there. We're gonna make simply a stroke. So let's have nothing selected, and with the pen tool, so we can hit P for to get the pen tool, and I'm gonna hold I'm gonna click once here, and I'm gonna hold shift and click on the right side here. So it's gonna make it that, and here I can click here to change its color. I'm gonna make it white, the stroke. So orange, blue, and white. That's great. And then I got a stroke there, so I can change its width by changing that here, and we're gonna go right in the contents of that, and right in the stroke options here, we can click on the little plus sign here, and shut this off, and then it's gonna make it some dashes, which is great. So let's get up here, and the dashes, we can change their settings here, and we can animate its offset, which is marvelous. And if we click once more on the plus sign here, we can even have this one more setting here to allow us to control the gap in between our dashes, which is a great option here for simple stuff like that. So let's animate that. Let's loop this using the offset. So let's make one here, and let's hit Shift F8. So we take a picture, and of course we can calculate it with using the math, but I'm gonna go to frame 45, and I'm gonna, oh, this one was not at 0. Anyway, it can be anywhere, but let's set it at 0 for the start, and let's go at frame 45, and let's take a picture. I'm gonna hit Control Shift H to remove any visual elements. So I'm gonna move this right until this dash here gets up to this the same place as this dash, and it's gonna make it loop. So let's go, and let's move that. So, and I'm gonna hit F8 to see if it's aligned. So now it's not aligned, so it needs to go further on the left, a little bit further more, and there, it's 114 pixels. It's right at the same place. When I hit F8, it doesn't move, but right in between there is this interpolation. And we're also gonna alt click there, and we're gonna make it a property loop out thing. So it's gonna loop, and since 45, since 90 is divisible by 45, then it's gonna work with our loop thing. So let's hit Control Alt front slash to refresh, and there we have our little dashes that are moving there. And I think that we can maybe have them a little bit thicker. So let's do that. And this is all like getting stretched. So let me refresh. So these lines might seem like the gaps, and it might seem a little bit stretched. So we can simply cut that back by multiplying this by 2, or dividing it, I mean, and also dividing the gap by 2. So that'll make our pieces like that. And will it still loop? Yes. But now we can also divide that number by 2. So that's something that we can do to if we want more, like more of them, and keep our loop active. Or we can also, if we want, I mean, there's nothing preventing us from that, we can scale it on the X here. So if we do that, it'll make it easier for us to change its scale without having to worry about our keyframes and the loop and everything. So that's another way if we want more. And what I'm gonna do though is half down the gaps in here and just verify if it still loops, because for some reason it won't. So how many did I remove here by having that in 2? I removed 21. So divided by 2, it's 21. And here I'm gonna remove 21 from that. So minus 21. And I think that doing that should make it loop for us. So I hope it's not too confusing, but here we're messing around to we're manipulating how this affects the look of our texture mapped on our object. So now we can set this back. We can set this back to 1, or I mean not this one, but this one. We can set it back to 1, and this, let's try 2. So we can, on the fly, we can try different aspects once we've set it up nicely, so which makes it cool to manipulate for experimentation. So that's great, I think. And I'm gonna just speed up the whole thing. So this thing I wanted to move faster, so I'm gonna go to another multiple of 90, which is 25. Is it? No. 90. Let's try 15. 15 is a good number for us. So let's just bring this there, and it should work. I mean, we can test it here, going to the frame 14, and it's gonna be looping here. So, and now it may not have changed here, so we might have to force it refresh here, and this should make it a little bit faster in here on the playback. Now everything is static, so we want to make this tendrils move. We want to have those tentacles a little bit of a wobbling action, and prior to do that, we can maybe also just increase a little bit. Like now we have this contact shadow, and we can control it from the ambient occlusion right here. So we can start by increasing the radius, and we can start by increasing the intensity. So we have to be careful, because simply because it's kind of noisy if we overdo it. This effect, we have to stay pretty subtle with it, and we can increase the scale right in there. So now we just want to make sure that like it drops some shadows there. And then we can increase the lift. So depending on what you're after there. And one other thing that we can do is, if we want to make this a little bit more plastic, like we can add a built-in environment with reflection. So let's do that. We're gonna open up the material and lighting, and let's get under the image-based lighting, and we're gonna try the graffiti ruins, and that's pretty cool. So by default it's like that. Perhaps we don't want as much reflection, so let's bring this down to 12, and we're gonna increase the diffuse strength now. So right now it's kind of affecting our floor at the same time, and it's kind of buggy. So we want to remove the reflection from affecting our floor, and how we're gonna do that, we're gonna add one more here, ref colon 0, and then we're gonna refresh. So now our floor is kind of black because it's not being lit up by the diffusion, and if we increase that, it's gonna light up our thing there, but not the floor. So we want to add an ambient light. So let's hit Control Shift Alt L, and this one we'll call it amp, and we're gonna select the ambient light, and let's make it white. So we're getting back in with our color there. And now we can reduce the diffuse strength here. Let's set it back to 100. So does it make it a little bit nicer? I mean, it brings a little bit more detail here on the reflection. It's not necessary, but the way that if we do that, it's we're kind of forced into having this this ambient light here, or else our floor doesn't get lit up as perfectly as we would want it to be. So let's start with that, and oh yeah, what we can also do is have it twist, because right now they're all like straight, and maybe they'll look a little bit more organic if we have them twist around like that. So I'm gonna make it 360, and since we're not dealing with a closed loop here, this doesn't, I don't think it'll need to loop here, but the higher this value is gonna be, is gonna make like nice little twisteroos with that. So that's another nice thing that we can mess around with to have this kind of an aspect there. So in my example, I set it just for one rotation, one quick rotation. So what does our animation? So this is our animation right now. Everything is static. We could have a whole fractal in there animated, and then it could control that. But what if we don't want to? We don't want this like distortion. We want to really affect the position of our thing along the path. So this is why the offset animation sequence is there. We're simply gonna animate that. So we can, I think we can check that, and then we're gonna basically set up our rig. So we're gonna our loop rig. So we're gonna set a keyframe at 0 here, and we're gonna go at frame 90, and we're gonna set that to 100, and we're gonna make it loop by clicking there, and we're gonna activate the offset animation. So right here we're gonna mess around with the position, the world position X, Y, and Z. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna go to the internet, and we're gonna go get Dan Ebert's wiggle, and we're gonna copy this code here, because this one needs to loop. The other loops, the other wiggles we had, is just to generate the geometry, and it's not a closed shape, so it doesn't need to loop. But this one, this is going to make it animate. It's gonna wiggle the tentacles. So let's add one. Let's alt click on the stopwatch for world position X. So it's gonna start with this one, and I'm gonna paste that. And that's messes up everything. So first, the loop time, it's 10. This is one what we put here, and we could even, like a good practice, I wonder if it would be a good idea to always do that, like to make sure that the loop time is exactly this. But once again, I'm gonna keep it manually hard codable. Let's reduce the frequency of that, and let's reduce the amplitude as well. So our floor is getting all messed up, and that's, well, quite unpleasant, because if it stayed in place, we would have everything right. So what we can do if we want to remove the floor from being affected by the thing, like we could write down OFS 0, and that would in principle mean that it's not affected by the offset, but the offset animation sequence kind of getting in the way. It's kind of on anyways, and that's a bummer. and it's not OSF, but it's OFS. So this will like our wiggle in the position affects our floor, and that's not good. So what we're gonna do here, we're gonna type down TFM colon 0, and that will, and it won't work. So now it's still a little bit messed up, but also we need to remove the repetition, because now our floor is also getting repeated, so we want to prevent that from happening. We want only one floor, so we're gonna add one more rep colon 0, and that should make it okay. So let's so there. So now we have the animation here punched in, and it doesn't mess up the floor. So now it's moving on X, and a little bit slightly, but it's gonna make it wobble on the X. Let's have it do that on all 3 axes. So I'm gonna copy the code from here. Control A to select all, and Control C to copy. Alt click on the stopwatch, paste. Alt click on the stopwatch, paste. So we can go in the settings here, and where we have our custom properties, we're gonna add this animation seed. And you could add the frequency and the amplitude for the others, but we're gonna make this quick. So I'm gonna add right here seed random, and I'm gonna make, I need to let's remove that, get back on the settings, lock this down, and now I can go here, seed random, there, and I'm gonna grab this line of code and I'm gonna paste it on top of everything else here and here, there. And why not, let's make an animation amp frec, animation amp, and you can make one for X, Y, and Z that is different. So let's do that. Frec X, amp X, and let's pick up both of those, drag them down there. Why won't you do it? Why won't you go there? Alright, like that, and then we want that to be Y, Y, and there, Z, Z. So then let's go frec, that's the X frec, that's the X amp, that's the Y frec, and then the Y amp, and finally here I'm holding shift and hitting on the left arrow key to help me select that and link it to there. And why don't I see all the way down? I'm gonna drag this up down there and grab the 11 here, and oh, my window is starting to get a little bit clustered. I want to get down here, and I want, no, this is the Y. Let's go to the Z, the amplitude, I want it to be this. So alright, now everything should be shut off in terms of movement, because we have all this to 0. So now we can go in here, and I don't think these should be too high, so 0.55, and the frequency Y, frequency Z, and then we can go and increase the Z, increase the Y, and increase the amplitude X, and let's test it out. So there we have some kind of nice wobbly motion going on. And it's always gonna loop. So let's go and let's get back to here and unlock that. And let's get in the rendering. I think we can increase the amount of shadows that we have there. It's always about getting it right as you want it. So this is what the floor has to have to not get messed up by the offset animation sequence when it's active. So if you have the TFM set to 0 and the rep set to 0, and I don't think that the OFS is necessary, so we can remove this one, but those, like, it needs to be like that if you want your floor to have that means you would be able to easily have a floor with a texture, because it's going to be the same texture as on your object. So pretty fun way to mess around. And of course we can set the super sample to 16, and that'll help it make those a little bit smoother here on the edges. And you can always, once you've set up everything, now we've got 64 segments, we can up that number there, and it's gonna make everything a little bit smoother. Let's just not overdo it. I think 274 should be enough, and the sides we can set that to 32 if you want it to be real smooth. And on top of that, let's add an adjustment layer. So see, I've added a layer and everything stays the same because we've got our seeds punched in manually. Like, we've linked those random seeds to a fixed number, so we can add as many layers as we want. It's not based on the index of the amount of layers, so it won't change when we add stuff. Let's add a level effect. So I'm gonna bring this in, and maybe at this time it's not necessary, but we can all click on this number here to go up to 32 bits per channel, and then we're gonna get all the depth we need for in terms of color. And let's get in each of them separately. So where is my result? There. So what we can do here is simply bring this up here to where the graph ends and mess around with that here just to get a little bit more richness in those colors. So here the green, we can pull it right up to there, and doing that is not like a perfect practice, a perfect science, but usually it kind of helps popping things out and controlling, like, is this how we want it? Is this the kind of color we want? It kind of looks great. So let's do that. So before, after, a little bit more punch in there, and on top of that, let's add a curves effect so we can increase the amount of contrast, if that's what we need. And we can always rotate around with the camera. So keep in mind that everything is quite fast to render. And one more thing, we can go right in the texture there, and this, let's set that to linear, and I don't think it would change much, but yeah. And that's pretty, it looks like it has a fractal in it, but in reality our fractal displacement is still at 0, so this would be something that we would even be able to add on top of that. And if you want to remove it from the floor, same thing. Everything we affect, if we don't tell it specifically, it will be also applied to the floor. So usually we want to keep our floor straight. Sometimes it would be the other way around, but we can do that simply by going in the paths and the paths from tau lights, and we have to activate the fractal amp from fall off distance. And once this is activated, let's go back to our floor light and let's twice tap on A quickly. And right here, the fall off distance, let's set that to 0. There. So we have the fractal applied on our object, but the floor is kept straight. So that's another. It's starting to get pretty interesting there. And the fractal, if you want to reduce its complexity, simply set the oct scale to 1 and lower this down as well. And we can set, instead of regular, to multi. Sometimes it makes nicer curves with that. If we increase the frequency, it's gonna make it more messy. So lots of nice stuff that we can experiment with our nice little tentacular abstract thing there that we've created, which is pretty cool. So I think it crashed. Oh yeah, I just once again listened to this, and I just forgot to explain something I think is useful. So suppose we want to make an widescreen, I mean 16 by 9 video out of this, and we want to keep the same camera angle, I mean the same proportions that we have here. So let's try that. Let's duplicate our comp here, and let's call this one wide. So we're gonna double click on it, and first thing, let's change its settings. So let's make this one normal HD 16 by 9 ratio. So once we do that, it'll mess up a little bit our tau, but let's just get here and Control Shift Y to change the solid setting, because we have to make it to comp size this solid on which our tau is. So this should make it like that. And then if we want to get back to the same kind of camera angle we had here, simply get to this camera here, Control Shift Y to get in the options, and our angle of view here is what matters. So right here I can copy this value here, and if we go right here and we get in the options here, our angle of view is not the same. So as I paste this and click OK, we should be looking at it from approximately the same angle. I'm just gonna have to pull back a little bit. So once again, we can make this 28mm if we want to have a more dramatic perspective here. So we're gonna have to zoom in. So that makes our widescreen 16 by 9 ratio accessible to us in a couple of clicks with what we made in a prior square composition. So that's fairly useful in more than one situations. Alright, our floor is not big enough. If you have this, you want to fill it up, you can simply like add a 0 at the end of this, make it larger, fill up the space. You understand. Alright, so cheers, have a nice day, and thank you for watching, and as always, see you next time. Cheers.